Welcome back. Unfortunately for mining, it's been a week no one wanted to report on given Implat's tragic mine accident, which claimed 11 lives, and ArcelorMittal's decision to basically shutter its steel plants in Newcastle and Vereeniging starting from January, which will place 3,500 jobs on the line. As Ray McLucker wrote this week in Daily Maverick, it's an indictment on President Cyril Ramaphosa's reform agenda, which has arguably failed to deliver on promises set 4 years ago to remedy the electricity and logistics crises. So Implat's aside, the ArcelorMittal announcement is because you've got no building, no construction, no investment.
Nothing.
And you've got a homegrown steel industry, which was admittedly, and I think someone mentioned it, when it was still ISCOR, it was allowed to get fat and bloated under the apartheid government. It wasn't particularly well run. And then it was split into, what was it, Kumba?
Kumba, ISCOR, Exara.
Exara. So yeah, that was the genesis of the but they've had absolutely no support, no demand from Southern Africa, and they've been crushed by imports. Has not been a happy place to be.
No, it hasn't. And it is, and yes, ISCOR was fat and bloated and all of that, etc., but it's long since fixed itself up. All three of them have. And interestingly, if you'd got in the IPO some 30 years ago, I think you paid R1 a share. You've done spectacularly well. But this is a blight, and I think Ray's 100% correct. It was 4 years ago a year ago that was Nasrec, and then the 5 years before the previous one, the great hope and of Ramaphosa, and it's almost a bigger failure than Zuma. At least when Zuma came in, there was no hope. No one looked at Jacob Zuma.
No one had a single expectation.
And thought, here is a man who's going to, raise us above, etc. And I was one of those. I really thought that our president could do, and he could have. I really think he could have. He didn't. Whether he chose not to or was unable not to is irrelevant to me. The point is he hasn't. And this is 3,500 jobs.
Yeah.
And, of many.
And just on Implats, it's you don't want to do well. I don't know enough of the facts to make you. It's impossible to pass judgment. It's a horrible thing. It's a dreadful thing to have happened. They haven't had an accident in a very long time. In such an accident, in fact, the safety records for South African mining improved considerably. So this kind of puts everyone back, and everyone is now on the back foot anyway in the PGM sector because they've just been crunched essentially by the palladium price. What's happened to rhodium? So it's been a dreadful week for South Africa's PGM industry.
It has, and credit to the mining space. I remember, forget the 80s where there would be hundreds of deaths. Literally 500, 600, 700 at a time, and the papers would put the white names in and then say 680 other people and stuff. But even just 2007-8, I remember there was this sort of accident was a commonish occurrence. Easily a dozen a year was sort of happening. The fact that it happened is absolutely tragic. We need to get to the bottom and it's sorted out. But the mining sector has become a lot safer than it was just a decade and a half ago. And to that, they deserve the kudos. Now, they need to get to absolute safety. They probably can't. You and I wouldn't be here if there was a chance of dying on the job. Let's be quite clear. I'm a coward. I would be at home in my bed. So it is tragic. It's 11 lives. There is no washing over that. But they have improved. And that is, I think, noteworthy. 0 lives has to be the target.
Yeah. Well, keeping with the grim mood of Industrial Town SA, Invicta's results were nonetheless testament to grinding out a small win. Here's CEO Stephen Joffe on the first half performance.
Very, very tough general environment and choppy, not only in South Africa, in every jurisdiction in which we trade.
Yeah.
With higher interest rates, people that hold inventory, they're trying to reduce their inventory holdings to help with their interest costs. And you've seen that play out in every single market that we operate. And typically we supply the wholesalers. So that's very much where we play. And the net effect is people hold back on orders as much as they can.
So it's almost comforting to know that it wasn't just South Africa that was tough for Invicta. It was every market, as you said, that they operated in. And there were decent results. Invicta has been, Invicta Hideco, the industrial sort of heartland that remains in the JSE, actually has performed pretty well this year.
What's left, and there's not much left, both in the JSE and I suspect in the non-listed space as well. It's the classic bull market plan, but this is a case of, South African companies are making a plan. I asked Stephen, obviously load shedding's hurting him, but what about his downstream customers? And he said, no, load shedding's not their problem right now. It's a problem, but it's a problem they've learned to work with, and that's the scenario. It's interesting that we're seeing that interest rate come through in so many different ways. I mean, one is just good old-fashioned cost of debt. We've seen that pain coming through. But inventories, I hadn't truthfully thought about that as a potential knock-on from it. For what was a tough period, not a bad set of numbers.
Does that suggest that if interest rates do start coming down next year, internationally, that you would see companies such as Invicta have a kind of be sprung forth from the constraints of the last 2 years?
Sprung's a big word. I was all with you until sprung. Yes, that certainly it is. And it is, short answer, interest rates coming down takes pressure off all over the place. We as South Africans are used to interest rates. The rest of the world isn't. But the interest rates that we currently see are, it's been a while since we've had that. Yeah. That foot comes off that pedal. That good governor just couple of points here and there.
Yeah, come on, Lesetja, you can do it. Although then I hate to say that the OECD said this week that they don't think interest rates, and they were talking about worldwide, should or are going to come down next year. So they said 2025. So let's hope they're wrong. Then there was Zeda, which came out with a fabulous set of numbers that seemed to take more than a few by surprise. It's not easy, but it's not awful either, especially if you've got some sort of a tourism business.
We still believe interest rate is going to be a challenge for us for a while, and that will still put pressure. The new vehicle, we still look at the stock of the new vehicle. We believe that will still put pressure on the used car industry. So those are the biggest two that we really believe. On the positive side, we believe that our country is still a good destiny, for tourism, and also internally we believe that our South Africans are even under a lot of pressure. There's still trouble. So we.
It was good numbers. They paid off the unbundling debt like in double quick time. Kudos to that. The tourism, absolutely. I was a long haul flight this last week. Third of it is business. 2/3 are tourists, and half of those are foreigners coming in. People, because also they're going to hotels and Airbnbs where there isn't load shedding, and they're going to restaurants, so they're kind of immune from that sense. And Azar, man, it makes for a beautiful holiday. And then, of course, businesses out there. I've been chatting with business people again, and they're still zooming, but they're zooming less than they were a year ago. They're catching aeroplanes. They're going to Cape Town and Durban and meeting clients. And then an election next year, that's going to pull up some car hire as well.
Definitely. I think Wayne McCurry mentioned that the PE of Zeda's 3 times multiple. Does that make it cheap enough to buy, or is it actually something that should trade on a low PE?
It's one of my picks for next year. It should, Selects, not on the 3 times PE. Combined Motors, probably 5. Motors is probably 6. They're similar-ish type of businesses. So the whole sector is incredibly cheap. This is cheap in a cheap sector. But what happens with the unbundling, a lot of people are like, what's this Zeda? I don't want an agri store. It's not so they're selling it. And then the price collapses, and now they're depressed. And then the price rises, and they sell into the strength. So it's had some extra pressure. That overhang, a year later, is it still there? Don't know, but that does put some extra pressure on it.
So your pick for the Crystal Challenge. Can I just ride your coattail, Simon?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I think I had it last year. It didn't work then. Well, this year.
And then Vukile managing to wring some rental increases out of its customers. Go, Lawrence.
We're certainly seeing on the whole our tenants doing well. We saw turnover growth of around 3.5% over the period. Obviously, within that, there are some winners and losers. Some players are gaining market share at the expense of the other. But overall, we're seeing that our tenants are doing well. Our rent-to-sales ratios are very low. And as you correctly point out, that is the highlight for us, that not only have vacancies stayed low, but you're seeing rental tension and rentals are increasing.
Yeah, it is actually consistently impressive to contrast Vukile with what the retailers themselves are posting, what a Bidvest came out with this week, and you think they managed to increase rentals? That's impressive.
Oh, because you need the space, right? And they've got the clout, they've got the space there. They're a good operation. And the other thing I like in this market is our property. Now, I've liked that for a while as well. I think this year we are...
But early to that party, Simon.
Yeah, and sometimes being early is hard to tell from just being wrong. But they things are looking better. The LVTs are down, the NAVs discounts are looking chunky, the yields are looking chunky. And I know we can get great yields in cash without the risks there as well. But this is when you want to be looking at stuff. But I mean, Vukile has long been one of those little property stocks that just sort of puts their head down and carries on with operations. And to your point, squeezes out rental increases.
I know. And the vacancy rate, 2%, if you consider that a growth point. Okay, of course, Growth Point has a huge office portfolio, and that's really its Achilles heel right now. But it's quite dramatic. Also, they have the Spanish operations, which seems to be doing quite well for them. Or are we just blinded by the fact that they're earning anything in hard currency and it just looks fabulous because the rand is kind of
look at me
collapsed?
Some euros any day of the week. but it is a good operation. I actually think their South African operation is perhaps superior to their Spanish, but it does give them hard currency, so can't argue with that.
Further afield, you've probably heard of Shein.
I don't know.
Never know how to pronounce it. But if you have any sort of Instagram presence, or if you work in SA retail and you wonder why the youth ain't shopping at your stores anymore, you may loathe its ethos of fast disposable fashion, but if you're a hardened capitalist, you'll probably be gung-ho for its planned listing next year. So
It's like 80 billion odd.
Yeah, well, I think a couple of years ago it was apparently worth $100 billion.
Okay.
It's this business that's sort of quietly become this absolute leviathan in the world of retail.
On TikTok,
Instagram, which is interesting because the TikTok, Instagram generation is very, very supposedly environmentally conscious, and yet they lap up what is really, really bad for the planet, which is its particular brand of fast fashion.
Fast fashion, and is it made in sweat houses? I mean, maybe it isn't, but I remember all those influencers who went and sang lyrical and then got totally hosed on the social medias. It is. I mean, I know nothing about this. I'm not their market. I patently don't wear it. I would look probably strange in it. But by accounts, it's great stuff. It's really cheap, and they're not paying full import duties at this point. They're paying small parcel import duty of only 10%. So it is quite nice and cheap at this point in time.
Yeah, and the FT has a fascinating article about the founder, who is the most reclusive man. He's never given an interview. People don't even really know what he looks like. So they're not in. So that's going to be interesting to go public. And finally, how could we not mention Elon Musk in his latest uncouth and yet arresting address to the world at large? There's something more than a little off kilter about a man who needs advertisers to spend money on his platform, telling them to F off. But he's the free speech champion after all. The whole world will know those advertisers killed the company, and we will document it in great detail, he told a rather stunned audience this week. His chief of advertising, Linda Yaccarino, then reposted what she called his candid interview, writes the BBC, adding her perspective on advertising that X is standing at a unique and amazing intersection of free speech and Main Street, and the X community is powerful and here to welcome you. Yeah. I don't know what to make of that at all.
I think he's going to be recording this obituary on Facebook.
Baffled is all I can say. Simon, thanks for being the guest this evening. Hope you have a great evening and a great weekend. That was the week that was.